Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and today we'll be talking about the future of class design for World of Warcraft. If you guys have not seen the video with the depth insights with Ian Hazakostas, I feel like you guys should go watch it, and I'll have a link for it down in the description below, because the insights that Ian provides us for the future of Battle for Azeroth and future expansions to come is actually super exciting. It doesn't really go into the full detail of what we'll have in future patches, future raids. It talks about baseline things that a lot of you guys probably don't care about, but really should. Things like reward and design philosophy, gear reward scaling, gear and character progression, PvP, gear crossover, and especially class design. It's no surprise that since the beginning of Battle for Azeroth, class design has been a very much priority in a lot of people's minds. A lot of people felt like there's a lot of shakeup with this brand new expansion, and not for always the better. Battle for Azeroth started out as an expansion that saw a lot of prune from a lot of classes. Not only did we lose our artifact weapons, a lot of our talents and traits got shuffled around and abilities became talents. We saw a lot of classes lose a lot of the buttons that we used to press with every single expansion, and BFA culminated into the smallest possible amount of abilities that could sit on your bars for a majority of classes. Added on top of it, that they added the whole GCD to a lot of the powerful abilities. Mostly abilities that are used as self-buffs like Adrenaline Rush or Warriors with the Recklessness. Any of those abilities became just an empty button where you press it and nothing happens. And a lot of people found that design to be very janky. Now, this isn't just a BFA thing, it's just something that's been happening over expansions. I would say starting with Warlords of Draenor, into Legion to some extent, but the artifact weapon made up for a portion of it, and into Battle for Azeroth. Well, our good guy Ian Hazakostas came out talking about classes, and it looks like the future of class design in World of Warcraft is looking actually pretty bright. Some of the things that Ian talked about were pulling back abilities that they seemed to think were redundant or homogenized a bunch of classes. Think about every class having, let's say, a 5-second stun. That doesn't really make it all that variety driven. That really makes every class feel samey. If every class is a root and a incapacity crowd control like a sap or a paralysis by monks and a 5-second stun, every class just starts to feel the same. Some classes should have silences, some should have fears, some should be very tanky, some should be squishy, some should be bursty, some should be very sustain driven.
And while at its core we do think that there was a lot of good work done there in terms of removing redundant abilities, pulling back from some homogenization, consistent point of feedback has been the concern that we've gone too far. There are places where, in Warlords and in Legion, we were probably too focused on button count as a measure of complexity. That led to us pulling back a bit farther than we probably ought to have. So we look at some abilities that we removed that reduced overall button count, but actually probably did more harm than good in the act of taking them away.
So at the time, Blizzard thought that difficulty or complexity of classes had to be all about the number of abilities, but instead of making classes less complex or more complex or changing the difficulty of play, you simply made more boring classes without any flavor. Ian talked a bit about Alter Time for mages, and I remember when they added this ability back in Mists of Pandaria. It was actually a very skill-based ability. It would basically set a stamp of where your mage is at when you first press the ability. Any buff you had, your health, your position, and you could use this ability to run away and kind of port back to where you were, or use certain buffs that you got, like Fingers of Frost procs, then port back with those same Fingers of Frost procs back. You could use it for defensive in PvP. Pop to Alter Time, have a warrior wail on you, get you very close to death, and then you Alter Time, back yourself to full health. There's a lot of cool ways of using it, but not everybody knew how to use it properly. So most of the players that were raiders or PvPers knew exactly how to use it, but then you had your average players that did dungeons and dailies, and they didn't really have a use. They didn't really fully understand the ability. They didn't really fully, I guess, explore that aspect in depth of World of Warcraft. So because your average player didn't really use this ability fully or didn't even have it on the bars, Blizzard thought, hey, let's remove it, trim the fat. But then our mage is better. That's what I like from Ian. Asking, are mages better off without the ability? Are they more fun?
One example that comes to mind for me is something like Alter Time for mages. Fun, super flavorful and thematic ability that allowed for some masterfully skillful plays, also allowed for some masterfully skillful ways of getting yourself killed if you misused it. A lot of players probably ignored that ability. If you looked at it, you're like, I'm not totally sure when and where I'd want to use this. That was fine. Many players probably didn't even have it bound. It was realizations like that that led to us removing it, but I'm not sure that mages are better or more fun, or that WoW class design as a whole is better for not having Alter Time somewhere in the mix.
The fact that a developer like Azeroth, who's been such an integral part of World of Warcraft universe and the class design, for the better or for worse, this man actually is asking, is this better? Was this fun? The fact that they are actually questioning their own decisions from back in the day, I think is a really good idea, because you can apply it to almost any ability that was introduced at one point with an expansion and then removed. That can be done with talents, that can be done with class design, the philosophy behind how classes work, how many abilities should they have, how complex should the class be. This opens up a lot of opportunities for future improvement for classes, and the more abilities we could put in with this kind of design format to maybe bring some things back that were better for classes, I think that's always a good thing. He continued on with warriors and stances, using certain abilities in certain stances, and eventually, as he says in the video, all the stances and abilities weren't really integral to each other. Every ability could be used in every stance, and then it felt like, well, stances feel redundant, so let's remove stances. But is this unique mechanic of what warriors did back in the day, using certain abilities from stances and dancing between those stances, learning which ability worked with which stance, was that something that should have been removed? And can Blizzard maybe bring back that uniqueness? Maybe not in the same robust way that it worked, where, let's say, the average player wakes up in the morning and is like, I can't pummel anymore unless I'm in battle stance. What is this? Which stance should I sit in? Is there an easy stance for me to hang out in? You know, instead, can they somehow bring back the unique aspect of stance dancing back to warriors without making it too jarring?
There's no question there was something thematic and unique about stance swapping and the way that whole system played out originally. There's a certain point where we think it would likely be too jarring for a bunch of warriors to log in one day and discover that you actually can't pummel unless you're in the appropriate stance, or that you can't charge or, or hamstring or the like. How can we offer a sense of, identity? How can we offer a sense of uniqueness that goes along with what that used to represent? Those are the sorts of questions that we're asking.
And for someone who never played the game way back in the day where warriors actually had to do stance dancing, this sounds like an awesome mechanic. It sounds like the most unique thing ever, and being able to do this properly lets you outgrade day. I mean, honestly, for somebody, this sounds awesome. Why was this ever removed? At least that's my first thought that I have. And I think a lot of people would be in a similar boat, like the idea behind what warriors do. Certain abilities using certain stances. You could probably make a bunch of macros of every one of those abilities in order to shift you from stance to stance if you wanted to, or if you had to do it manually. I think that'd be so much more fun. So Blizzard admits they went from, instead of class identity, towards a more spec identity, but taking away certain abilities that were baseline for classes and given it to certain specs. In the case of rogues, we have Gouge given to Outlaw and Garrote given to Assassination, or Poisons being an Assassination exclusive. And what if Blizzard could take certain aspects of what rogues are and bring it back to the class rather than keep it for a spec? I think Poisons would be a very good one to decide on. Poisons are not all that important for Outlaw, or not really all that important for Subtlety, but they are important for Assassination on damage front. But even if we didn't do damage without poisons, still having a wound poison and a crippling poison for PvP for both specs of Subtlety and Outlaw, I think would definitely go a long way. This would allow all three rogues to have a Mortal Strike effect for PvP, and will put them on a more even playing field, so whatever players are playing with a Subtlety rogue or Outlaw or Assassination, they still get what a rogue brings, which is wound poison, but the rogue still gets to choose how they want to play. As a Piety Outlaw, a Masterful Subtlety, Master of Openers, or a Deadly Assassination rogue.
As we moved abilities from, class-wide to being spec-specific in a number of cases, we've perhaps gone a bit too far away from that core choice that players make when they're looking at character creation, looking at character select, and they decide whether they want to be a mage or a hunter or a shaman or a rogue. Ideally, specialization should truly be just that. It should be taking a class and picking a facet of it that excites you the most, with which you identify the most, and doubling down on that and becoming a master of that. Instead, for many classes or some specs, that choice entails almost turning into an all-new class with entirely different abilities and only a little bit of overlap. And that's an area where we actually would like to also pull back from.
The focus for Blizzard going into future expansions would have to be designing classes and working on a class. The specs on its own should be a choice for players to choose which flavor of that class they like, but the base class needs to be good, needs to be cohesive, and needs to be fun baseline before any of the specs can shine. I feel like this would also help out Blizzard in terms of balancing classes and balancing specs and the design philosophy behind them. Overall, it's good to hear Ian talk a bit about the class design for future World of Warcraft. And I would imagine that maybe Blizzard is starting to work on a future potential expansion right now in the background. I think what we will see out of Battle for Azeroth is not a lot of class changes. I think BFA will continue on with the way the classes has been for quite a bit, and they'll make some small adjustments in order to help anybody to enjoy their class. Certain specs that need to be buffed, that need to be nerfed, Blizzard will do a little bit of balancing and try to help out where certain specs just don't feel great to play. But I think the biggest design change for the future World of Warcraft is going to have to come in the future expansion. So I think at this point all we can really do is wait until the brand new expansion way later. I don't know how many patches they're going to have for BFA, but way in the future, off in a distant future, we are going to have a brand new expansion that is going to focus on a lot of class redesign and bring it back, the uniqueness back to classes rather than keeping the uniqueness primarily in the specs. Overall, I cannot wait for the day when we finally see the fruits of that labor, and I really hope that Blizzard is going to focus really hard on every one of those aspects. But overall, this is some very exciting news, and I'm actually very happy to see some of the stuff happening from the developer side, because that means the future World of Warcraft might just be in the right hands. It all sounds great on paper, but we'll have to wait and see for the final outcome at the end of it all. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts about the class stuff. What do you hope that Blizzard does with classes or specs for the future World of Warcraft? And by future, I mean in future expansions, because I very much doubt we're going to get most of those changes happening anytime in BFA. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Honestly, this feels like Christmas for somebody who likes World of Warcraft. Patch 8.2 is looking exciting, classic WoW on the horizon, and the future World of Warcraft is looking extra bright as of right now. Very excited to see what the future of WoW has in store for us. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see all of you in another video.